Conceive, believe, achieve.
This is former UFC middleweight champion of the world, Michael Bisping.
Paddy the Baddy here. You're listening to Combat Sports UK.
And you're watching...
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Combat Sports UK podcast. This is episode 3, and we are looking at some MMA. Even though you do see the wonderful looks of Nathan Shields, we are not here for boxing. We're here for MMA. Nathan, how are we doing, mate?
I'm better now, mate. We've just spent the best part of 40 minutes trying to get through Wi-Fi issues, camera faults, using different apps. It's been an absolute shit show, hasn't it? But there's a little peel behind the curtain for everybody. So, yeah, we're on now. We're up and running. Let's go.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone out there's now got PTSD going back from COVID, working from home, sitting on Zoom or Teams or anything like that. Like we've just had. But thankfully, you weren't hungover from a christening or anything like that, so it wasn't too bad.
Completely fresh.
So, how did you get on with the fights this weekend? What did you manage to watch? What did you manage to consume over the weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I saw the full card, mate. Watched it through its entirety, and do you know what? It's funny because we talk about the fights, we talk about everything else, and one thing we don't talk about enough is how shit it is for UK fans to consume MMA. Honestly, it's a nightmare. Like, for me, I went to bed. My missus came upstairs to read a book in bed, and I went downstairs and slept on the sofa from about 9 o'clock through till 12 o'clock with an alarm set, ready to get up and get cracking with these fights. You know, I don't think the American audience appreciate what we have to go through as British fight fans. It's a full life commitment.
Yeah, you see them all coming out of the woodwork, right? When it's the flip side, when we have a London card or an Abu Dhabi card, right? Because that's usually a good time zone for us. I don't think Abu Dhabi's too bad for the US, but it's not great for them. We had the Singapore one as well, right? That was a good time for the US. You see them all come out of the woodwork. To be fair, I will absolutely admit, if it is on at that time in the morning, I'm just not doing it. I'm not doing it to myself, because by the time I get to Monday morning and I'm teaching my grade 9s and grade 7s, they will eat me alive if I've not slept well over the weekend. So I just don't do it. I get up, spoiler free on a Sunday, usually go to the gym, download the prelims on Fight, even though that's a pile of crap, because you see sometimes spoilers in the post-fight press conference, especially if it hasn't finished. So when I can, I avoid download, watch it at the gym, then watch the rest at home. So I tend to stay okay. I just can't do it. Can't sacrifice it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, if anybody's listening to the podcast and you've got any advice on how to get through these fight night cards or pay-per-view cards over in the US where they start at crazy o'clock in the morning for UK fans, drop it in the comments and let me know, because it's a slog. It's an absolute slog. Don't get me wrong. The good thing about the UFC MMA in comparison to boxing is that they roll the fights out quickly. So you've got a fight and then that finishes. You've got another fight. Whereas sometimes I've stayed up to watch boxing in the middle of the night, the same thing again. And you watch a fight and then you're waiting 30, 40 minutes for the next fight to start. And you're thinking, fuck, I might just go back to bed. At least the UFC kind of keeps you ticking over, you know?
They do. I mean, that's because they stack the undercards, right? There's always some jeopardy on all of these fights. You don't really have too many gimmies, unless your name's Raul Rosas Jr., of course, with his last fight. So they have to, right? The quality's there. And then I think the boxing, they just build up so much that main event and get people's buy-in for the pay-per-views. But that's why they do it. They don't know any other way, right? Because they can't stack undercards very well.
Yeah, I mean, we watched, I can't remember what the card was now, but it was one of the first ones I did for Combat Sports UK, where I was covering the live events and the socials and everything. So, as you know, because you'll have done it, you're on there, you're updating the Facebook account, the Twitter account, you're updating the live feed for the live results, you're creating all the pictures and the background saying who's won the fight, with, you know, waiting for the images to upload. And the first card I watched was just finish after finish after finish after finish, all sort of first round ones. Now, I'm watching the fights thinking this is great, but I can't even enjoy the entertainment, because as soon as the fight finishes, I'm on a mad race to get everything done before the next fight starts. I'm finishing up, you know, on the socials and whatnot and sharing all the posts that I've just put together. And before I know it, I'm looking at another fighter walking out and I'm thinking, Jesus Christ, I'm like tip-tapping away, got speedy fingers going off, and yeah, it's hard work, mate. But I know obviously for you consumed the UFC a little bit differently, didn't you? Because you were elsewhere at another organisation this weekend.
Yeah, two fights. So me and Patrick McQuarrie. Shout out to Patrick. First time kind of meeting him. The absolute legend that guy is. He puts in a hell of a grind. We went over to Octagon 46 in Frankfurt. So I live in Düsseldorf in Germany. He lives in Frankfurt, a little bit further outside. So we met up and went over there. And we were aiming to do we did a lot of content. We did the live updates, as you say, and it went exactly as you just said there. It was finish after finish after finish. And it was at a point where when I was doing the graphics and everything, I turned to Patrick and I'd be like, what was the result of that fight? Because I just missed it because I was doing the live bits and pieces. We managed to get a post-fight interview with Nico Samsonidze after his finish. He secured a first round triangle. He's coming back off return of, how long was he out for? I think just over a year with a injury. And those are pretty serious. Yeah. So we covered that. What an absolutely incredible event. 9,000 people sold out in the Frankfurt Festhalle, headlined by Jacinta Austin and Katerina Delizda. And on the undercard, you had former UFC fighter Andreas Michailidis picking up a big knockout to go into the finals of the Tipster Game Changer, which is kind of like €1 million pyramid. So he's going to be fighting against Bekovic in December in a huge arena over in Bratislava or Prague for the final of that. So that's one to look out for, and that'll be the main event. Octagon are also coming to the UK November 4th, I believe, for Octagon. I think it'll be 48, and that's going to be headlined by Jake Quigley and Paul Smith, who are now doing Stage to the Cage. There's a huge event, loads of British fighters on that. Tickets are available. Get yourselves to that event because Octagon, it's my second event with them. Absolutely sick. It comes to a very close second to the UFC. They're absolutely on fire. So yeah, with relation to Noche UFC, I consumed that kind of the next day on the bus coming back, and I was getting cut off, and then I got home, got the main event, got the co-main event, got some of the other talking points. So I know you kind of want to jump in right at the beginning. You got some thoughts and feelings on the card as a whole. So go ahead. Unleash.
I mean, to be honest with you, mate, before we move on, I want to just give a shout, because if you're consuming this podcast, whether it's you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Play, or you're watching us on YouTube, go and check out Octagon, because for all the things that people will maybe slag the UFC for, the lack of walkouts, the atmosphere, the music, the UFC is very professional, it's very top level, it's very elite, but it doesn't necessarily give some of the fighters a chance to show their personality, when they're walking out and stuff. I mean, you think back to, I can't remember whose it was, Izzy's walkout, I can't remember who he was fighting, but when he was doing kind of the dance at the start, it was pretty cool. But you don't get that very often. They're out, there's a bit of music in the background, and they're getting checked out and in the Octagon. But I was speaking to Andreas Michailidis before his fight. Obviously, we had the interview with him there, and he was saying the crowds at Octagon are just different. He said it's just, the event is insane. I talked to him about some of the venues, some of these outdoor Coliseum looking, like in half broken down arenas, just look insane. The atmosphere looks absolutely crazy, and I can't wait to get to my first Octagon event. I've obviously, since going on to Combat Sports UK, that was kind of my first intro into Octagon, and now I'm all in on it, because the party atmosphere, like Andreas was saying, you've got families there, you've got kids there, you've got wives there, you've got guys out all together having a bit of a drink and watching the fights. But it's a party atmosphere, and it's inclusive. Everyone can go and everyone can enjoy it. It just looks unbelievable, man. So yeah, shout out to that, and shout out to the Spartan himself picking up that win there, because I was kind of watching through Fight Week, and I'll be honest with you, mate, I felt he was flying under the radar a little bit. They seemed to not Octagon as such, but I thought that the media outlets in general were very focused on Griezmann. I think they probably favoured the two losers eventually from the semi-final to be fighting in the final. I think that's kind of where they were looking. That's where the promotion was, and the two underdogs, if you like, came through. But it's crazy, because I was talking to Andreas on that interview, and I was talking about his UFC career, and he kind of didn't want to get too caught up on it, because he was saying, I'm looking to the future, I'm enjoying this. But he also sort of agreed with my comments, which were, how well his losses in the UFC have aged, because the two big ones on there were to Fakhretdimov, who just retired Kevin Lee, who's been an absolute monster, and Alex Pereira, who we're looking at being a two-weight champion potentially. So within the small amount of fights he's been into the organisation, and he was winning the fight against Pereira in the first round, and then he just got caught. You know, which can happen in this game. So, and I was looking at his physique as well, and you know, he seemed to be carrying a little bit of extra weight, if you like. He maybe not put as much work in while during his UFC time, but if you look at him now, he's absolutely ripped to the gills. So it's good to see. I was happy for him to pick up that win, and I think he's guaranteed 130,000 now, and I think it's 300,000 if he is to win the Game Changer tournament. So yeah, shout out to Octagon. But that's not what everybody's going to be tuning in for, is it? Let's be honest. Everyone's here for Viva la Mexico UFC Noche.
They are indeed, and we're not short of things to talk about from that card.
Nope.
Right? We are really, really not short about things to talk about from that card. Where do you want to start? Where should we kick off?
I think we'll start at the first fight of the night, because I think this card, whether the fights were the most entertaining or whether there was talking points in them, almost everything had something that you can review. Some will spend more time on than others, but we'll start with the first card. And the reason we'll start with the first card is because when we come to the main event in particular, you will notice something that has been a common theme throughout the card, which people may not have necessarily looked into, but it was something that stood out to me on the comms and stuff when they were talking about the cards. And when I looked, you don't look at the judges' scorecards unless there's something controversial.
Often, no.
And then when there's something controversial, you look at them. So I made it my business to go through all the scorecards of the evening, and you will notice some names that you will recognise because they've been hot topics over the last few days. So you can kind of tee me up with the fights if you like, and we'll go off from there.
So we had in the very first fight, Knudsen versus Mann. This was one I actually got to watch. I think we got back for about 2:30 in the morning, European time, that is, from the Octagon post-fight press conference. I got to watch this fight. I had a bit of a personal interest.
Sorry,
Simpson.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, mate. There's one other thing I wanted to ask before we moved on. And if Lewis does listen, and you might get into trouble, so you might have to watch what you say. But I know you and Patrick went out to the pub before the Octagon event, and went and watched the Liverpool game. So tell me, was it a sober Taylor and Patrick at the event? Were you ultimate professionals, or did we enjoy a drink or two?
Totally. Look, I had a little Corona. I was watching Liverpool after all, so you need something to get through that.
Oh, God, yeah.
But no.
Yeah.
I had a little Corona. Patrick was on the Pepsi Maxes, and then we kept it chill before we went back to the hotel to kind of decompress and then head to the event. We kept our cool. Octagon take really good care of us, to be fair. We had food, drink. Yeah. Shout out to Scott as well. You know, the team there, they were really awesome with us. So we were coming into that press conference full of energy and full of good vibes. But let's just say the people around us weren't as cautious.
No, I can imagine now. But yeah, go on. Sorry, you were talking about the first fight of the night before I rudely interrupted.
You're good. So yeah, we went Knudsen versus Mann. Knudsen pretty much put it on her, from what I remember. Not too much really to go over there. Charlie Campbell, Alex Reyes. What do we think of that one?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I would just mention on the Knudsen Mann fight was the scorecards. Did you see the eventual cards? Did you see what was read out?
No, go ahead.
So I made a little note here because they actually scored it 30-24 to Knudsen.
Yeah, I did see. Yes, yeah.
So when we're talking about 10-8 in a little while, that fight might be one to go back and look at, because you will see that a couple of the judges there handed out some 10-8s. I mean, that fight was a one-sided beatdown, really, but there wasn't necessarily fight-ending scenarios as such in that. So, but yeah, I was intrigued by it because, like I said, I just woke up the alarm had been set. I just woke up and still rubbing my eyes as the fighters are kind of walking to the octagon. So I kind of just scored it round for round and went, well, that was a round for Knutson, that was a round for Knutson, that was a round for Knutson, and I came to a 30-27. But in hindsight, thinking about it, if I watched it back, it'd be interesting because it was quite a dominant display. But like you said, there's not too much to talk about there. It was just, I thought I'd mention those cards because that's mainly going to be what we talk about today. So,
it's a good thing you mentioned that, because I remember it very slightly in my mind thinking, 24, hold on a minute, there's that. And then trying to do the mental math at 3 a.m, it wasn't happening for me, so it didn't stick. Yeah. But go on. Charlie Campbell, Alex Reyes.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie Campbell showed the UFC guys, because we'll talk about this with Jack Della Maddalena a little bit later on as well, and a couple of others on this card. It's spoken about all the time that what you do in the octagon is sometimes less important than what you say on the microphone, because we have seen fighters, for example, Colby. You look at Colby Covington, you look at the kind of style that he has, it's very wrestling heavy. I mean, don't get me wrong, he enjoys to strike as well. It's a little bit more entertaining, but Colby was maybe on the verge of getting cut from the organisation because he just wasn't a big draw, and they just weren't interested. And then he goes out, tells everyone Brazil's a dump, upsets everybody in the arena and in the country, has to run out there fearing for his life. And then it's been a downward slope from there in regards to that same sort of mentality. And, Colby's a big draw because of what he says. Nobody's tuning in for a Colby Covington fight thinking this is going to be, fight of the night. It's going to be a massive thing. And for here, Charlie Campbell was superb. I thought he was sharp. Yeah. He looked like he carries some serious power in him. But he was, funnily enough, he won the fight, but I think he was lucky to get out of the octagon alive.
Interesting. What exactly did he do? It's one of those I missed. What did he do?
Well, basically, he got the microphone from DC. DC went into the post-fight interview. So DC's in there, and Charlie grabs the microphone, and he says, "Hey DC, what did you think to my boxing?" And then DC goes to pull the mic back to say and give his thoughts. And just as he does it, Charlie snatched the mic back from him and said, "It doesn't matter what you think," in kind of tribute to The Rock, which was just fucking brilliant. And DC sort of said, "You know, I love a good wrestling quote, so I'm going to let you live." But I thought, I bet he feels, DC was smiling, he took it well, but I think he was thinking, "You little fucker."
I like his style. I like that style. Bring it back.
But the point was that if you look on socials, that's all over. And this is the guy that was on the second fight of the night, way down on the prelims, but he took his moment. He got a great finish, and then he killed it on the mic afterwards. So people will tune in to see him, But yeah, that's kind of that was the only takeaway for me on that one. I thought it was a pretty dominant performance. Just continues the woes in the Reyes family, but there we go.
Yeah, I actually do remember seeing that snippet when I caught up after being spoiler free. So that takes us nicely into the next fight I've got on here is Tracy Cortez. Her performance over Jazz Duvicius. What was your take on that one?
Well, before I go into it, I'm going to refer to her as Jazz, just because I don't have the professionalism that you have, and I'm just kind of the village idiot on here to give my opinion. So I'm going to keep it nice and simple and just refer to her as Jazz. I thought the fight itself was a really good fight. When we talk about scoring again, and this is the first time I'm going to shoot to it, I actually gave round 1 to Cortez. I gave round 3 to Cortez, but I gave round 2 to Jazz. I don't think there was an argument there. I thought the hands from Cortez were just insane. Obviously, we used to her predominantly wrestling, showing the grappling skills, but she was, honest to God, mate, the hands were superb. I mean, I cover the boxing, and for her to go from where she was at to where she is in the time off that she's had, unbelievable. She was slick, she was fast. The only thing that I did take from it, which is something she'll need to work on, is she's very easy to hit. Now, in this fight, she was throwing good hands. She was landing big shots, and she got caught quite a few times on the counter. But when she steps up in opposition and she starts to fight some of the girls at the top of that weight class, she's going to have to start moving her head a little bit or get those hands up, because she was there for the taking. You know, we're talking about big shots landing, and that's definitely something she's going to have to take a look at. But overall, she was great. I thought she gassed towards the end, but she'd given a high output throughout the fight. So I thought it was a great win for her. I mean, she got all emotional on the microphone afterwards. She's obviously had a lot going on in her personal life and a lot of things that were keeping her out. I've seen since that she's had a number of injuries and a load of different things keeping her out of the octagon. So great for her to get back in there, and it looks like she came through unscathed. So hopefully we'll see her back out soon. But when I talked about the cards, and I touched on that, mate, I'm going to bring up a couple of these cards because I scored the bout 29-28 for Tracy Cortez.
Right.
And I thought that was pretty clear across the board. One judge agreed with me and scored it 29-28 to Cortez. The other two judges were Sal D'Amato and Mike Bell. Now, if you talk about poor scorecards in MMA, and not even in MMA, but it's Sal D'Amato in boxing, which is actually the sport that he's kind of come up as a judge, he's questionable there as well. You know, this is a guy that consistently gets scorecards wrong, and I am going to throw him under the bus because it needs pointing out. And Mike Bell will come back to again as we go down the line, because Mike Bell's the opposite. Mike Bell generally is a pretty good official, but I thought on this night he had an absolute shocker. But yeah, round two for me, I mean, it was very clear that Tracy Cortez had lost that round. She won the fight. Yeah. She had moments, but there was no way she won that second round. And yeah, I mean, it's funny because I can't remember the judge's name now, and it seems bad to call out the ones that get stuff wrong. But the judge that scored the bout 29-28 to Cortez also judged a number of fights that night, and his cards were bang on the money, including the main event, I believe.
Okay, so it's just a case of the other two.
Yeah, but like I said, those two, I mean, we could talk about, but we'll move into the next fight because the next fight obviously had some drama of its own.
Yeah, so this is the Edgar Chairez and Daniel Lacerda fight. So just remind, I've seen this one. This is one that I actually caught up and I saw. Yeah, really odd, really odd. Kind of shades of Robbie Lawler, Ben Askren. You kind of think of is one of the bigger examples of something like this happening. Yeah. It's really curious, I think, in situations like this where you have, you know, is it the responsibility of the fighter to respond to the referee and make out that he is conscious, or is it the responsibility of the referee to do the checks properly and let it go?
This is the problem. I think this is the problem. It's not the fighter's job to let the referee know. It's the fighter's job to get out of the position that they're in. So it's for the referee to make that call. Now, don't get me wrong. I'll be honest. I'm not, I don't train in jiu-jitsu. I don't do any grappling. I mean, if I was to stand up and look in this camera and you'd see the size and shape of me, then you'd know that. But, there's not an ab anywhere in here. But I do understand the game. I've watched it for a long time. And from the camera angle on TV, it was very clear that the arm dropped. Now, I have no issue with that because when I saw that drop, I thought, oh, he's out. But Dominic Cruz was on the comms and Dom was saying, he's going to stop this. I can't believe he's going to stop this. Because he said this particular referee has had these issues in the past where he's jumped in and stopped fights prematurely. So, and Dom was alluding to the fact that he doesn't know what he's watching, doesn't know what he's looking at, doesn't know what he's refereeing. And he kind of went off on a bit of a tangent regarding referees that should train in do some training so they've got some kind of awareness. I mean, you see like Mark Goddard, for example. Mark actually trains and does jiu-jitsu himself. So he's fully aware of the concept and understands if somebody's in a good or bad position, what to do. And I think we saw that in the main event with Herb Dean as well. And I'm not Herb Dean's biggest fan, but I thought he refereed that superbly. So sounds like I'm coming for everybody in this, doesn't it? But
Yeah, someone's got to be in there. But Chris Taone, it was the referee of that fight. I mean, I think the examples where I think of where fighters have gone out. The biggest one that I can think of is Bisping, GSP, where Bisping went out like he was sleeping, snoring, everything. And another one that sprung to my head, it's also in the main event came to my mind, was the Volkanovski Ortega one. Right, he's in that choke. His head is purple. His head is purple. And the referee is still not jumping in. To see this situation, I think it's so disappointing because, you have to train and you have to know what that position is like. What you need to look for from the fighter, because usually they jump in and they do the arm test, right? They pull the arm up. If it drops, then they call the fight. Because, from being choked, it's going to take a long time for someone to actually kill you, right? So you do have that bit of leeway to get the arm and to make sure that somebody is safe. I'm somebody who does do jiu-jitsu, so I kind of know what it feels like. Not at this level, of course, but I know what it feels like to be in a choke and to know where I'm at a point where I'm seeing stars and things are going out, right? You tap. At a professional level, if you're the ref, you've got to let it go as long as possible in that situation for me. I'm not a fan, obviously, of somebody getting overly hurt, but in this situation, it's not an arm lock where, Octagon, for example, Christian Jungwirth got caught in a bad kimura, and he stayed in that for too long, and his shoulder is shredded. His shoulder is absolutely shredded by now. In that situation, if a referee sees something's going to pop, jump in, because that is a joint, a muscle that messes up careers. But something like a choke like that, you need to let it go a little bit, especially when his hand's there and you just spoke to him. You just said to him before that, he said, "Are you okay?" And he says, "Yeah." You can go, "Yeah," and then the arm drops. But
I think the problem is, like you said, once the arm dropped, it looked bad visually. It looked like he'd gone. But it's the referee's job at that point, because we're not talking about leaving him for 5 minutes. We're talking about seconds. And like you said, all it would have took was the referee to go in and grab that arm. And if they'd have pulled back and shown that they were still in the fight, or kept the arm up and shown they were still in the fight, then it can continue. And it's not a big issue. Because, I mean, when he stopped the bout, Chires looked like almost bewildered, because he must have been able to still feel that Lacerda was in the fight. He must have been able to feel him still fighting it, even though his arm had kind of gone limp. But I mean, the sad thing is that obviously both fighters there walk away without a win bonus, because the decision was correctly overturned to a no contest. But I say correctly as well, and I'm not sure. The way that when the referee split the action up, he stood up and he looked like, what are you doing? Why have you stopped the fight? There was a slight part of me that thought, has he just come back round? Because he was so quick in the referee. He could have gone. That arm could have gone limp because he temporarily blacked out. And then as soon as the choke was released, did he come back round? It wouldn't have taken long. And what's the fighter going to do when he's in there? He's going to say, well, what are you doing? Because it might not to him have even felt like he went out. So there's that side of it. But like I said, the sad thing is that neither fighter gets the win bonus. And I mean, for me, if this is later on in the fight, if we're in the second, the third, halfway through the second round, for example, or we're going into the third round and this happens, then you've got no choice but to call a no contest.
Yeah.
This was in the first round and it was early. For me, if both fighters are okay and this has been shown to be a no contest and, a faulty referee's decision, start the fight again.
Yeah.
Start the fight again. You've lost 2-3 minutes from the card. Both fighters are fit to continue. They've not really exerted themselves. Start the fight again. If not, and that's obviously not what happened, they just swiftly moved on. But get these guys on a card in a few weeks' time. Because, they deserve the money. They deserve the chance to fight for something. They're both fit, both healthy, not picked up any injuries because the fight didn't go on long enough. You don't want to see them straight in next week or this weekend, for example, because obviously they've had the weight cut, so you don't want them jumping back into another cut. But, a few weeks down the line, and I think both these guys will be ready to go, and I'd just run it back. Get them both back in there, and let's see how it plays out this time.
Yeah, it's a good point you make there, because, you think of an eye poke or a groin strike, a fight could take 5 minutes. And sometimes you see multiple of those in a round. Right, so when there is something like this that happens, why not restart the fight? Where is the issue there with restarting the fight. There must be something that we as fans and us in the media as well are not privy to, in terms of what the referees and the athletic commission say. That could be the case. I don't know for certain, but it could be. But yeah, I totally see you. I think you're totally right. I think you restart the fight either from that point and you just treat it as the 5 minutes as a foul or whatever, and then you go back to it because these dudes deserve to carry on with the fight.
Yeah, I mean, they've made it a no contest, but for my money, I just kind of look at it and think, you've stopped the fight, you've used the video officials, if you like, to review what's gone off and decided that this was an incorrect call. What's the point in doing that if you're not going to let the fight continue?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
It's like anything. It's like if I mean, we had one in Paris, didn't we, with Gamrot, with the kick, the low blow that maybe was or wasn't a low blow, but the referee just went, no, go on, fight, because he said he saw it as a legal blow, and Gamrot turned his back and he went, right, it's off. But then Gamrot turned round quite visibly fit and able to kind of continue, but just saying he's just smashed my cup and it was a low blow.
Yeah.
Well, again, review it. Take a second, look at the review. Don't get me wrong, I'm a football fan and I hate VAR, but it's very different in this concept. So review the tape, have a look and go, you're right, it was a low blow. Right, you've spent 2 minutes having a look at this. You've got another 3 minutes, if you want, to recover. And if it is a legit strike, you go, well, fight's off. Well, you need, these guys train and they go through a training camp and they pay out money and they do all this stuff and they come to fight night, and then it's almost feels like both guys were kind of robbed of their opportunity a little bit because, obviously one goes away without the win bonus thinking that they'd won the fight and experiencing that the referee stopped it, I've got the stoppage. And the other one says, I wasn't out and you've stopped the fight and declared me as a loser. And now it's all right, it's a no contest and that's been overturned, but I'm still going to miss out on X amount of thousands of pounds. So I thought that was one that was just worth touching on again. But yeah, that's about it again for that one.
Where do you want to jump to next? What next fight kind of jumps out at you that you kind of had an opinion on?
Like I said, mate, honestly, I'm just going to run straight through this from now to the end, pretty much. There's one I'm going to skirt over a little bit, which is only because it was so dominant, and I mentioned it last week in the preview, which was Josh Fremd stepping in against Kopylov. What a massacre that was. I mean,
you mean Chase Hooper?
Yeah, Chase Hooper on steroids. Yeah, it's I mean, he's just a massive version of Chase Hooper, isn't he? But he's just. I mean, you look at him and you would never imagine that he fights that way. I mean, when that guy throws leg kicks, you can feel him. You can feel him through the TV. I mean, he was landing with some serious intent. And I saw Josh Fremd last time out, and I said, this could be an interesting one because Fremd stepping up, Kopylov's on a bit of a run, but I was interested to see how the styles matched up. And honestly, I was hoping the stoppage came, but I was hoping for the referee to jump in before that because Josh Fremd was just trying to be tough. And he did show a lot of toughness in there because it would have been a lot easier for him to quit in that fight kind of before that body shot landed, because the body shot snatched it away from you anyway, but it wasn't the cleanest and it wasn't the biggest of hits. It was just an accumulation of the damage that he'd taken throughout the fight. It was just so one-sided, and Kopylov's a problem, mate. It's going to be interesting to see what they do with him next, because he wants to be knocking on the door at some rankings and picking up some fights with some top guys now, because for someone that came into the organisation and lost the first two, he's picking up some serious steam and looking really dangerous. The worst bit was, for me, he didn't even look like he got out of second gear. I thought he was just so comfortable in there, and he absolutely dominated. But I mean, as for that one, again, we'll just move on from that, because one I want to talk about, which you kind of touched on something which you won't have seen yet probably on this one, was Lupe Godinez and Elise Reed. Yeah. Because you were talking about the submissions and when a referee should and shouldn't jump in. Well, as soon as you said that, I could tell you hadn't watched this fight, because the you remember the Mo Mokaev knee bar?
The knee bar, yeah.
Where he basically bent his knee the complete opposite way around, and Mo never tapped, and I needed surgery on it. Yeah. Picture that on an arm.
Yay.
So we had an arm bar from Lupe on Elise Reed, and the toughness she showed, mate, to not tap. Honestly, the arm was bending the complete opposite way. I mean, it
Ferguson
was just,
Oliveira.
it was, yeah, I mean, it was insane. Honestly, how that arm didn't snap, I'll never know. She was phenomenal. Just the bravery she showed to stay in that fight. Because one thing that I want to touch on, other than obviously the fact that she got the finish in the end. I mean, she basically picked her up, slammed her down, and took the rear naked choke in the end to finish the fight in the second round.
Yeah.
But Lupi Godinez, mate, is a problem. She's a real problem in this division. I mean, she's again had taken her trials and tribulations as she's come through the ranks. But honestly, that was a real statement performance. She was fucking great. She was really, really dangerous. It was one of those performances where you look and you think, because I saw Yasmin Lucindo, and she was unbelievable a few weeks back. She was absolutely dominant. I thought, Christ, she looks a phenomenal talent. And this was a different Lupi Godinez. I know she's training with Alexa Grasso, isn't she? At the moment, she's kind of in part of that camp, and she was fucking sensational, mate. She was honestly. The only thing that I'm going to point out on this fight before we move on is one of the judges.
Judges.
This round, I've just put some notes here from Godinez versus Reed, and I've put round 1, the stones on Elise Reed. Hypothetical stones, that is, of course. But Godinez dropped her massively with a left hook, went for the rear naked choke, great transition to the arm bar, should have been over, practically snapped her arm, but fair play to Herb Dean for letting it continue and allowing her the chance to fight on. They were my notes from that first round, followed by 10-8 Godinez. That was supported by 2 of the 3 judges.
Right.
The one that didn't support that was Sal Diamato, who gave it as a 10-9. And if you watch that round,
your best mate, Sal Diamato.
Honestly, Taylor, if you watch that round, that's the definition of a 10-8. She was absolutely essential. She dominated Elise Reed. She beat her from pillar to post. She had the submission attempt. She switched it into another submission attempt. And anybody else apart from Elise Reed on that night is tapping. So I don't see how that can't be scored a 10-8. I mean, we honestly, that armbar was that tight. We're potentially looking at a 10-7 because that's how dominant she was. Because a 10-7 is basically a round that could have been finished by the referee, but he decided to allow it to go on, but only because they were able to kind of survive, but not really, done anything in the round. This was just so one-sided. I gave it a 10-8. But I wouldn't have been surprised to see a 10-7. Then you've got Sal Diamato giving a 10-9, which was just, honest to God, unbelievable. But then we got Padilla versus Nelson. Pretty close, cagey fight, to be fair. Nelson got his hand raised. The crowd didn't necessarily agree and gave him some shit, and he basically said "fuck off" on the microphone, speaking to the Mexican fans. He basically said, "Boo me, you fucking do what you've got to do." And do you know what? I'm going to touch on that actually now, because it was a theme throughout. The Mexican fans, don't get me wrong, there's a loyalty base there, and it's great. You want the Mexican fighters to win. You've got certain fighters which you may favour over others, but like I said, I'm a football fan, and if your team's shit, you boo them off, or some people will boo them off, and I've not really got a problem with that, because you're talking about a number of individuals that are just playing a game where there's no physical contact, or they've not done whatever. Show some respect to fighters. It's just a message for fans going to the fights. Win, lose, draw, whether something happens you don't like, don't fucking boo. Don't boo a fighter that's gone out there and put his or her balls, or metaphorical balls, on the line to give you entertainment, because these guys sacrifice, guys and girls sacrifice so much. They go out there, they go through training camps, they go through hell, they fight injured, they have personal losses in their life, they have all sorts of other stuff, and they still turn up and put on a show. And this fight was as tight as hell, and I scored it to Nelson. So I didn't have any issue with it whatsoever. I scored it 29-28 to Nelson. It was a close fight, but I thought he had the cleaner, more effective work, and I gave it to Nelson. Padilla, for me, should be kicking himself, because I think had he put his foot down a little bit more, he could have done that. But we see that from him. Sometimes he's just lethargical, like he thinks he's winning the fight comfortably, and it's just not. And I gave it to Nelson, but then the crowd's booing, and you think it's just not necessary. you know, you might, if you don't agree with the result and it's an absolute robbery, that's fine. But this fight wasn't that. You know, Nelson won the fight 29-28. But again, talking point, this fight, I went 2 rounds to 1.
Yeah.
The official scorecards were two judges gave the score of 29-28 for Kyle Nelson. And one judge gave it as a 30-27, which I had for round 1. I gave that to Padilla, and I gave 2 and 3 to Nelson. And in round 1, I said Nelson started well, Padilla came on stronger, close round, but very clear. It's very clear for Padilla still. You know, there was not a massive amount in it, but Padilla came on strong and nicked the round for me. But the judge that went against the other 2 again was Sal D'Amato, who gave it a 30-27. So don't get me wrong, this wasn't the worst card. I could see it, but 30-27 against Padilla, I mean, it was a close fight. I think if you're not giving one of those to Padilla, you're maybe leaning one way before the fight's even started. It just felt a little bit that way to me when it got read out as a 30-27. I think had we had a unanimous 29-28, I don't think the crowd would have booed anywhere near as much as they did. But you get a 30-27 in there, and all of a sudden it starts feeling like a bit of a robbery, which it just wasn't. But like I said, that's the reason I wanted to run through these in chronological order, because there's a common theme as we go along, and I'm not done yet. So we're moving to the next fight, which was Zellhuber against Giagos.
Against Giagos, yeah.
Giagos hurt Zellhuber early, and it was nice to see, because he hurt him bad, and then he hurt him again later in the round, and it was a real tough one, and it was a very clear round for Giagos. I only went 10-9, but it was a problematic round for Zellhuber, and for him to come through that showed just another level to what he could be, you know, what his potential could be, because the skill's there. It was just a question of sometimes, you know, was the heart there to go with it, and he certainly showed that it was. I mean, he came back in round 2, landed some big shots, hurt Giagos. Giagos basically panic shot on Zellhuber. And he locked on the Anaconda choke and finished it, and it was a spectacular finish. And yeah, it was good to see him wrap that one up, because he was he looked like the better fighter in there, but Giagos came to fight, and it was a real solid test at this stage. So I'm excited to see what they do with him next, because I think he's relatively young and he's got a promising career. So it'll be interesting. It's one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, the kid's 14-1, and I mean, to knock up an Anaconda choke, I mean, he's beat Lando Venata, Lucas Almeida. You know, he only dropped a unanimous decision 2 fights ago, so he's well on the way. He's well on the way to putting a streak together, getting people excited. And if you're going to do it, you do it on this card with hometown support. Obviously, they were in Vegas, but the whole idea of it was the whole Mexican theme. So that's a place to do it. So that is a name to watch out for, Zellhuber now. So that brings us on to another name to watch out for, Rosas Jr.
Well,
back with the bang.
Yeah, I mean, on this one, mate, I'll let you speak, because I know this is kind of where you've caught up to. So I know you've kind of consumed these a little bit. So, you know, I've been doing a lot of talking. So for anyone thinking, fucking hell, you don't shut up and let Taylor have a word, it's just because I know what Taylor has and hasn't watched. So it's easier for me to kind of take them on.
Good.
But on this note, mate, I'll pass over. What did you think? What was your thoughts on Raul Rosas Jr.? Because we talked in the preview to this and said, you know, he got found out a little bit last time. He got old man by not an old man in Christian Rodriguez. He was kind of shown for weaknesses and to be lacking in the striking in particular. You know, and it was a case of he'd come in talking Mr. Big Bollocks. You know, I could take on the champion now and beat him. You know, that sort of crazy shit that he was coming out with. So what were your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I think with someone like this, he's always living up to the hype that A, the platform that the UFC has given him, and B, how he's done that for himself. You know, there is some humility in there. I think one of the first things he did was he bought his mum a caravan or a house after that first fight in the UFC, and obviously his Contender Series win. I think it's very curious what you do with someone at this age.
Yeah.
Because he's still 18, 19, very, very young. You put him on a massive card like this, and it was massive, even though not a pay-per-view. It had the feeling of a pay-per-view. It had the media of a pay-per-view. It was everywhere. And you're putting him in there as one of your kind of lead stars, really, because of his heritage, because of his age, and because of the level of finishes he's got. You know, you look at him and you look at somebody like a Hamzat, right? They're not too dissimilar in terms of what they were doing to people before he ran into Rodriguez last time out. And that's where there's a massive hole in his game, obviously. Is he going to go away and work on it? You would hope so. You would hope that arrogance almost that comes across as doesn't stop him from improving and getting better. I think in this fight, did we see that? No. Against the better fighter, does he get knocked out? Yes. Right? You go Korean Zombie in the third round against Max Holloway against the better fighter, and you are going to get Korean Zombie against Max Holloway in the third round. Right? You're going to get flat on the floor. And I just think he had a very willing dance partner in Terrence Mitchell. You know, when we talked about Terrence Mitchell the other week, we talked about his variation of finishes. And it just looked like the pair of them just lost their heads, went full headless chicken mode, and just said, right, if he dies, he dies. That's it. End of story. And Raul Rosas Jr. was the one that came out on the positive side of it. And I genuinely think we don't know much more about him than we did before. I think the glaring holes, that's not answered because he never got into those positions. He never got deeper into the fight where he's got to get out of a tough position like the body triangle that Rodriguez had on him, where he couldn't get out. There was nothing he could do. He was getting big brothered by Christian Rodriguez. There was nothing he could do instead of just doing this, right? Yeah. So I don't think we're any further along. I think we've seen, if I'm a striker looking at that in that division, I'm thinking, oh, okay. If I can goad him in a little bit, I could have my time with him. You know, especially if you're a kickboxer and you can use the kicks to keep him at range. You could really make something of him. Is it exciting? Absolutely. Like, am I excited to tune in to watch Raul Rosas Jr. again? Yes. It will be whatever it is that he's going to deliver for us. It ain't going to be boring, you know, until he's probably 27 and he realizes, if I want to be a champ, I need to change my style. Like, I need to work out. But the good thing about him is the way the kids learn, and he is a kid, right? He's well, just turned an adult, but he's a kid in fighting terms. He's got a big kind of upswing. If he can really, really get a good gym behind him, get some really good coaches, stick with them for a while, who knows? His ceiling is kind of unpredictable right now. But I do think he's got to answer those questions. How the UFC build him from here is fascinating. What they do with him is going to be fascinating because they do have a real star on their hands for sure. But they have to nurture that talent. They have to nurture that talent in the right way. Is the UFC the right place to do it? Who knows? For whatever reason, they think he is. You don't normally see it. You kind of have the last couple of years. I think it was Macy Barber was the last example of this. You know, where she was talking about being the youngest champion and I'm going to do this and that, John Jones and this kind of thing. She ran into the roadblocks and then the UFC kind of, okay, put the brakes on, take some time, come back. We're seeing it also with Mo Mokaev. Yeah, right. He wants to be the youngest champion. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Rosas Jr. Where do you stand with him?
Well, I said in the preview that his arrogance and his attitude needed to change. Now, don't get me wrong; it's very easy for me to say that I sat here at 33 years of age. You know, I mean, if you've noticed, yes, it's the evening here. Yes, I'm wearing a hat inside, and the reason is because I've got this shiny bald head. I don't have the full head of hair like you. But back when I did used to have hair, I was a little dickhead. You know, that's no beating around the bush. That's what I was. You know, like so many of us were, because you're young, you're stupid, you think you know best on everything, and you know fuck all about life, anything that's, you know, involved in that. And don't get me wrong, I had a good upbringing. So, you know, Raul Rosas Jr. might have had it a lot harder than I have. But he comes in talking about being able to beat the champion and I could do it today and whatever else. It just turned me off him a little bit because I think there's one thing saying I'm going to be a champion one day. It's another thing coming in as basically a rookie and saying I could beat the champion now. Because the part of me wants to see you, just throw him in there, let him get a good fucking hiding. There's some NBA player talking about I could beat John Jones with 1 year's training. Put him in. Give him a year, put him in there, and watch John Jones absolutely smash him to bits. This sport's not an easy one. So, like I said, for me, I was listening back before the fight came up, and obviously, we're coming into the moments, and they've got a big thing with Raul Rosas Jr. They're trying to push him, and probably the reason he's in the UFC at such a young age is because he is talented, and if the UFC hadn't assigned him, he may have gone somewhere else and made them a ton of money. So he's a hot prospect at the minute, and people are tuning to see him. So there's that side to it. But as for his performance, when it was talking before the event, it was obviously showing clips of his media, things he'd said, sit down interviews he'd had and whatever else. And he's talking there and basically saying it's Mexican Independence Day and I'm going to give the fans a good old fashioned Mexican war. And I thought, bollocks. I'm not buying it. I thought, you're a ground guy. You're a grappler. You're not going to come out swinging. Of course you're not. So don't sell us this fight that it's going to be something that it's not, because you're just talking absolute shit.
Yeah.
Anyway, then he comes out and he absolutely knocks the fucking head off Terence Mitchell. And I'm thinking, well, there's an element of me, man, fair play, kid. But you're right. It's, the commentary team and everybody else is getting all hyped up about it and saying, look at this kid at his age. He's got all this talent. And yes, he has. But the UFC are going to have to be very careful with who they match him up with, because you're absolutely right. His chin was up. Yes, he threw power shots. To me, Terence Mitchell looked a little bit like a deer in the headlights. He kind of came out and all his work was panicky. It was kind of like, it almost looked like a fight that you'd see in a club, after a few too many beers. Just two complete arseholes just swinging at each other and, no real confidence in either of them. And then one of them just picks a good shot. That's what it felt like. That's what it looked like. And I'm not trying to hate on the kid or give him a load of shit, because he's a young kid. He's a hot talent. And he has got bags of talent. He's shown now that he's got serious punching power as well. Because when he hit Terence Mitchell, that could have been stopped before those follow-ups potentially. Now, don't get me wrong, he wasn't out, and I could understand why the fight was left to go. But the way he fell, when he kind of stiffened up and just dropped back, I thought, oh, he's out cold, and he wasn't. But he certainly, for a brief second there, I think he probably was. And
one of those.
Good to see it kind of go on, and there not to be any controversy there. But it was a solid finish by the kid, and he obviously packs power. He has a problem on the ground. He has got stuff that he needs to round out and work on. But maybe I'm being too hard. The kid's 18 years of age or whatever he is, and he's a bright talent. So it'd be interesting to see how they match him. For me, I'd like to see them kind of do it slowly and slowly build him a little. But like I said last week, this is the UFC. There's no knockovers.
No.
You're going to go in there. You're going to come up against some tests. I mean, he probably thought he was going to run through Christian Rodriguez. Look what happened there. So the kid's got a ceiling at the minute, but he is very young. And, as long as he's not kind of thrown out, you talked about Macy Barber there, for example. Macy Barber went on a bit of a skid. She suffered her first loss, and we've seen her have a bit of some moments in between. But if you look at Macy Barber now, Macy Barber's a problem again.
Yeah, big time.
She's on fire at the minute, and I think this is what we'll see. It won't be a trajectory like this. We won't see that. This is going to be ups and downs and ups and downs and ups and downs, and hopefully there's not too many of those downs where he hits a point where maybe he's just not as good as people think he is. But only time will tell on that one.
Yeah, I think we got a few years before he kind of matures inside the octagon, and then we start to see a more well-rounded fight. Because I think that analogy of two drunks in a bar is just perfect for that fight. So going from that fight into, I don't know how you'd call this one. Would you call it a chess match? Would you call it a tactical battle? What's your breakdown of JDM and old Kevin Holland?
Well, this was my fight. I said we're going to have a real there's no Mexicans in this fight, but we're going to have a real Mexican war. This is going to be chaos. These two are going to engage. It's going to be lightning in a bottle. They're just going to throw down. Kevin Holland isn't going to be able to just sit back and sit on his laurels. He's going to get stuck in with JDM, and I potentially could see a late stoppage or an absolute 3-round slugfest.
Yeah.
What a shit fight. What a shit fight. For my fight of the night, what an absolutely dog shit fight. I've been looking forward to this fight since it was announced, and it was crap. And for me, my takeaway was these guys had too much respect for each other. It just looked like JDM was aware that he was the better boxer, but that Kevin Holland was a threat. And if he got into a position where he was potentially taken down, then he was going to, he might struggle there. And he's probably coming off a little bit of a lacking confidence, because I know obviously he got his hand raised last time out, but there's probably some doubts there, and he knows he struggled and that was a hard fight. And, it kind of puts it, then he's going up against Kevin Holland, who's better than anybody he's ever faced. So, and a Kevin Holland that's in good form. And JDM, for me, some nice crisp boxing in there again. We know he's good with the hands. The disappointing thing for me was that he was throwing some nice shots, but because of how Kevin Holland was choosing to defend, he wasn't landing a massive amount. That he was kind of reaching, and Jack's not a reacher. He likes to get in on the inside and work his way in and throw close shots in. And instead, you were kind of seeing, a lot of these reaching left hooks and stuff. But Kevin Holland on the other side was almost not willing to engage. The odd pot shot here and there, but leaning right back like this was kind of his defense strategy, and turning his back and running away, and just so unconventional, but very un-Kevin Holland, I thought as well. Whether that was because Kevin Holland respected JDM too much and thought, he's a great boxer, I can get hurt, I'll keep it technical and stand off. But we talked in the preview, and Alex touched on it last week, that Kevin Holland had dialed in, was a little focused, and stopped running his mouth in the octagon, and was kind of focusing on his career. He was at the right weight. All those things I completely agreed with. Now I'm a little bit concerned that we're dialing Kevin Holland down too much, because that wasn't the crazy, electric Kevin Holland that we're all used to. And I actually put the emphasis of this fight not living up to expectation on Kevin Holland, because I thought of the two, JDM was more willing to engage. I think had Kevin Holland come back, then Jack would have started throwing those counters. But from Kevin Holland's point of view, I mean, it's a strange one, because I'll be honest, when I scored this fight, I actually scored it to Kevin Holland, which seems silly given what I've just, given what I've just said. But that's because there was fuck all in round 1 to score. There was fuck all in round 2 to score, and I gave round 3 to Jack Della Maddalena comfortably. So I actually scored it 29-28 for Kevin Holland, but I have watched it back since, and I score it 29-28 to Jack Della Maddalena. And I think that's, whether it was just in the moment, I was noticing that Jack was missing a lot of shots, even though he looked like he was doing more work. I was kind of focusing more on what he was missing than what he was actually landing, because that was clearer. But when I've watched it back, it's kind of given me a realization that Kevin Holland did fuck all in that fight. Absolutely nothing. And just really disappointing, because obviously we had Shavkat was meant to be on this card, wasn't he, against Kevin Gastelum. And then this one was kind of brought in its place, and the Gastelum Shavkat fight looked sensational. That fell off, and we got Kevin Holland and Jack Della Maddalena, which looked sensational. It just didn't live up to the expectations, this one, unfortunately. But the last thing I'll say on this one was when we talked about the microphone earlier on with Campbell and having his moment and sort of going viral. And I mean, we had it with Kyle Nelson as well. Kyle Nelson sort of said, I'll fight anybody. I mean, he did mention Cub Swanson, but there wasn't necessarily a call out, and there was a few as they went along. It was like, I'll just fight whoever the UFC gives me. And you're thinking, come on, you're not capitalising on your moment here. You've got a massive crowd, everyone's watching it. It's UFC Noche, it's a big stage, and you're all bottling it. And then Jack Della Maddalena comes on, and the crowd's booing him again, and he's basically saying "fuck you" as well, in the politest way that Jack Della Maddalena could do so, because he's just a nice, quiet guy anyway, from what I can tell. Yeah. But same thing. I'll fight anybody, whoever the UFC give me. And you're thinking, Jack, call somebody out. Yeah. You got the takeaway from this, Kevin Holland lost this fight, and Kevin Holland is already in the news and articles everywhere talking about how Kevin Holland has called out Neil Magny. In the loser cuts their hair.
Right?
Yeah. But
yeah. How's that work?
But Jack Della Maddalena's won the fight and he's forgotten about already. But people are now talking about Kevin Holland fighting Neil Magny. They've got to realise fighting is only 50% or less of what you need to do. You get on, and the reason I say or less is look at Kevin Holland. Kevin Holland's potentially lining up another fight in the top 15 against a fighter that's right in the rankings there with him higher.
Yeah.
You know, he's lost to Jack Della Maddalena. If Neil Magny fancies that and it's a good payday for him and he turns around and Kevin Holland beats Neil Magny, well, this was a temporary blip. He's right back in there now. So, yeah, just frustrating because I'm a fan of Jack and I appreciate it's not really in his nature to start slagging people off or calling people out, but it doesn't have to be. You know, you look at Tom Aspinall.
No.
Didn't slag anybody, didn't slate anybody. Massive fan of John Jones and Cyril Gane and whatever else. But he just says, you know, I've got this win here. I'm going to be cage side to watch Cyril Gane against Spivak. I'm going to beat the winner and I'm going to beat John Jones. Viral moment. There it is.
Done.
Or you look on Twitter, you look on any of these social media platforms the next day and it's all saying Tom Aspinall wins and what he said. And it's creating that narrative now. I mean, how many stuff have we written or, you know, things that we've seen where it says, well, Tom Aspinall's looking at that, you know, and then you've got John Jones replying on social media and saying, like, you know what I mean? Tom Aspinall even said, I didn't think John Jones knew who I was, but he came back to me with a reply, so now I know. So, yeah, just disappointing on that end.
I think I totally agree. I think he's majorly dropped the ball there. Like, especially look at that division, man. Shavkat, Ian Gary, to mention a couple, right? You call out one of those. It leaked last week, UFC Dublin in December, apparently. Jump on that, Jack. Like, you can turn around for that. Jump on that. You versus Ian Gary. Proof. Now we're talking, right? Headlining over in Dublin. A massive show. Everybody's talking.
Mm-hmm. Well, we saw a potential leak, didn't we? That, you know, we were talking about UFC in Dublin. And that's across social media. That's common knowledge. Whether it actually is legit and whether it happens or not is another thing. But that's what the rumour is going around. Jack doesn't need anything cement. Just say, I understand the UFC is looking at going to Ireland. I've seen it over social media. No one's confirmed it, but I understand they're going to Dublin. You need me in the main event to go and beat the Irishman in Ireland and sign me up. Well, you've got a fight there. Don't get me wrong. Gary's probably not going to take that fight because it's fighting back in the rankings. But you look at that, you've got Jeff Neal in there. You've got Sean Brady. These are all guys above him.
Yeah.
You know, he was supposed to fight Sean Brady anyway. It would have been equally easy to say, Sean Brady, me and you were meant to fight. You've fallen off. You've had your injuries. If you're close to coming back, let's get it back on again. Wow, great. You're talking about JDM and Sean Brady. Instead, we're talking about nothing. We're just looking at the rankings, trying to figure out who he's going to fight. And the problem for Jack Della Maddalena is he probably will get a good fight with a higher ranked opponent, but is he going to fight Shavkat? No. Ian Gary's probably going to fight someone above him. Wonderboy's not going to fight down the rankings. And as you look through and you look at this division there, those top 6-7 names aren't going to fight back against JDM. So there's only 2 or 3 names that he could really have called out anyway. So just pick one. You know,
it's only really Brady or Luke.
Pick someone like Ian Gary, create that viral moment. You don't get the fight, but you get someone higher in the rankings. Just seemed like a missed opportunity to me.
Big time for Jack. Big time. I totally agree. And I don't know. Maybe it's just his personality. Maybe it's just how the fight went. I'll give my very quick take on the fight. I want to see a fight like that go to a draw. Mm-hmm. I don't want to see a winner from that fight. I don't think either of them stood out enough to deserve a win from that fight. That is your stereotypical, to use a football reference, 0-0. Yeah. Sunday afternoon kind of game that no one's really fussed about. It really didn't live up to the hype. It's really disappointing. That's why I said when I looked at the last round, I scored the first round JDM. I actually scored the second round Kevin Holland for a hook, a couple of elbows. But again, we're talking millimeters here, right? I scored it for Kevin Holland because I thought he was better. I thought he was more active. I thought he got through JDM's shell a bit more. And in that last round, I mean, they showed it at one point. I've got written here on my notes. The live odds were Kevin Holland plus 200 and JDM minus 270. I don't know where that's come from. Well, it's obviously where the money's going, right? I guess. But
I think, yeah.
I didn't see it.
I mean, I agreed with you. That's where I was at. But I also agree with what you just said then. I mean, we don't see 10-10s. But you can score a 10-10.
Yeah.
And round 1 and round 2 are as close as a 10-10 as you're probably ever going to see in the octagon for me. I thought there was nothing in it at all. But I would argue that, you know, in the event of that, Jack Della Maddalena wins the fight because he clearly won round 3. So, yeah, that's kind of where I draw a line with that one for me. And then the only fight of the night left to talk about should be a quick little brush over that we don't need to really get into too much because there's no controversy or nothing to surround there. But again, just to peel the curtain back a little bit for everybody, the plan for this episode was to go through without breaks, start to finish, let's go. But we have been going for an hour and 7 minutes and I'm actually busting for a pee. So we are going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll break down Alexa Grasso and Valentina Shevchenko.
Combat Sports UK.
So welcome back, everybody. P-break's done, and we're going to wrap this bad boy up. We don't have too much to talk about. At least we can skip the first 2 rounds. They are pretty easy, right?
Well, as you know, I have a little bit of a controversial take on this because I have actually scored 2 rounds in this fight as 10-8s. Which
when you sent me that message, I was looking at that thinking, A, are we talking about the same fight? And B, what else has he given as a 10-8? Let's go. Let's hear it. Get out of it. Well, what is the other 10-8?
I know Patrick Danner's going to be listening to this as well. So, Pat, there's a little shout out for you, mate. I know you're listening in, keen to see why. I basically told Pat that I'd scored this fight this way, and he said, you're out of your mind. So I may well be right, and probably we're going to lose half the viewers, and this might be my last appearance on the pod, depending on how this goes. But I am going to go into it. But before I do, I'm going to start by just running through something that I took a quick screenshot of, which is from the unified scoring criteria.
Here we go.
Yeah, only because it backs up. I've left out the bit that doesn't suit my agenda, but I've put in the bit that does. So this is under the section for how to or when to score a 10-8. So judges must consider, not must give, but must consider giving the score of 10-8 when a fighter impacts their opponent significantly in a round, even though they do not dominate the action. So they don't need to be winning the round. They don't need to have the most amount of success in the round itself, but they do need to cause some sort of issue or some sort of struggle for their opponent. Effectiveness in striking or grappling. So when we're talking about damage, we're not just talking about damage as in beating someone up with fists or kicks. We're talking about submission attempts. We're talking about dominating on the ground. They all comes into it as a factor. So effectiveness in striking or grappling, which leads to a diminishing of a fighter's energy, confidence, abilities, and spirit. All of these come as a direct result of negative impact. When a fighter is hurt with strikes, showing a lack of control or ability, these can be defining moments in the fight. If a judge sees that a fighter has been significantly damaged in the round, which again does not mean necessarily striking, it just means, something effective striking or grappling, the judge should consider the score of a 10-8. So, on that note, I won't go into a 10-7, but we've discussed a 10-7. 10-7 is basically, it's a fight-ending scenario where we're looking at, complete domination from start to finish. One fighter's beating the living shit out of the other fighter, and the referee's just not stepping in for whatever reason, and they get to the end of the round. That's a 10-7. My issue is, I know it's being asked to be included a lot more, but 10-8 rounds should be used a lot more than what they are in MMA. Because when we look at some of these fights through this fight card, you could pick the Jack Della Maddalena and Kevin Holland fight, round 1, round 2, take your pick. Both scored 10-9 in favour of one fighter. Whichever way you had it, whichever way you saw it, it was a 10-9. You could also go back to some of the fights earlier on where it was a one-sided round. It was almost a bit of a beatdown, but people would say, well, it's not really a 10-8 because nothing dramatic happened. There wasn't really like a serious fight ending scenario. Well, we've already established that's a kind of a 10-7. 10-8's that scoring something 10-9 when it's razor close or there's no action, pretty much. And this is where we end up. There's too many. You can't judge a 10-9 as being a razor close round and then also score a 10-9 where you think somebody quite clearly won that round. But what you're saying is it wasn't dominant enough to give a 10-8, but it was a clear round to them. But that's the same score as you give for something that's razor close where there's nothing to split them. So for me, that's a problem. And I think we should see 10-8 rounds more regularly for a round that is clear to one fighter. A 10-9 for me should be, and I'm saying for me, but it's also in this criteria, a 10-9 round should be when it's a very, very close round and one fighter edges it slightly. If a fighter wins a round and wins it relatively comfortably and may not necessarily cause too much damage or whatever to their opponent, but we're not talking about an absolute pummeling here, that should be a 10-8. So, on that note, now that I've teed myself up, before I start, how did you score the fight?
So round by round, I gave Shevchenko the first round, Grasso the second, 10-9 to 10-9s. Round 3, I gave to Valentina. And then...
By 10-9.
Yeah. 10-9. Yeah. Round 4, that is the tough round.
The swing round, yeah.
That is the tough round, right? So before I go into detail, the score I gave it was Grasso, so we're at 2-2. Going into the fifth, and in the fifth I gave it Grasso, so Grasso 3-2, 10-9s. I did not give any 10-8s. And I'll run through my...
Oh, Taylor's just frozen a little bit there, so we'll see if he comes back.
Something's gone wrong.
It's all right, you're back now, mate, but you froze. That was all.
Okay.
I did say Taylor's just frozen.
What was the last bit you heard? Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, we'll be able to see from when I started off, but you might be better off you talked about scoring the final round to Grasso.
Okay, all right, okay.
So you might be better.
Final round.
Yeah, you might be better. Might be better off picking up that you scored the final round for Grasso, and then I think you sort of said I didn't score any 10-8s. It was just 10-9s, and then I don't know what you were going to say next. That's kind of where you got to before you froze.
Okay. So 10-9s all the way for me. No 10-8s in there. So before you kind of go in at the deep end, I'll just break down my rounds. For me, round 1 and 2 are pretty simple. Grasso wins round 2 for the knockdown. It was probably one of the most significant moments of the fight. Round 3, I gave to Valentina because of the guillotine, the very, very pretty tight guillotine that Grasso dealt with, and she only really dealt damage after that guillotine. So I thought the majority of that round went to Valentina. Round 4, those knees are what sway it for me. Those knees to the head. What they did not pick up on commentary, I think John Anik did, is that there is a very significant knee to the body as well as clinch strikes from Grasso. Then Valentina causes the cut, which is quite late in the round, 1 minute 46 left on the clock.
Yeah.
Up until that point, I've got Grasso winning the round. I don't think that strike is as significant as 4 knees out of 5 to the head, to the point where Valentina actually thought she had both hands on the floor and it should have been called a foul. Right? She didn't know quite where she was. Then you have the body strike. Then you have the clinch strikes. That's why I gave that round to Alexa Grasso. So then you're coming in 2-2 in the final round. And this, for me, was a theme in the whole fight. And what stood out for me before the grappling exchanges. Yes, Valentina had the jab. The jab was there all night. But you can watch every single one of those jabs and Grasso does not flinch. She does not flinch. She doesn't step back. You watch every single shot that Grasso landed, which I think was about 1-4, 1-3. So one Grasso for every 3 Shevchenko. Every single one that Grasso lands, it changes Valentina's approach to the fight. I.e., she either takes 2 steps back, she shifts out, she wants to get out of the way, she doesn't want to have those punches. Yeah, Grasso hits a lot of the air, but I think a lot of that is feinting and getting the reads. Valentina, don't get me wrong, she has the volume in this round. But for me, she doesn't have the impact and she doesn't have the damage that Grasso does. Therefore, that combined with obviously the ground exchanges, I'm not even going to speak about that ridiculous hip toss that Valentina tried to do, which she tries quite often. Women's MMA is kind of riddled with it, and it doesn't end well more often than not. Those ground exchanges for me just secure the round. I don't think it's a very interesting discussion, the 10-8, 10-7 discussion that we're having. But that's where I draw the line at scoring the fight. It was a 10-9 for me because I don't think there was enough damage for it to have been a 10-8. What I do think is the flaw in what you pointed out, and it's obviously not your opinion, it's what's written in the rules, is, okay, you start giving 10-8 rounds in a 3-round fight, you're going to have problems, right? For me, when I think about a 10-8 round, I go back to that time that Benoit Saint Denis got the absolute piss beaten out of him for 3 rounds. I think he'd stepped up on a couple of days' notice, and he got absolutely torn to shreds in the octagon. That, for me, is a 10-8 round, 2 rounds, right? Where the other fighters just got absolutely no, and it's just pure toughness. The Anthony Smith Glover Teixeira fight, there's a couple of 10-8s in there when someone's getting absolutely mauled, because I think, yes, that's what it says in the rules, but I think with the narrow time and rounds that we have in MMA, you can lose a fight in 1 round, in the first round, if that's the way it is. So that was how I scored it. I'm going to throw over to you. You take that deep dive. Give us your 2 10-8 rounds.
Do you know what the thing is? You mentioned something there, and that teased me up nicely with it, because the scoring criteria says what it says. Whether you think my opinion on that is correct or not, or whether I'm maybe reading between the lines and putting 1 and 1 together and coming up with 3, maybe that's the case. But we're talking about a fight here. Now, you mentioned about 3 rounds there and a 3-round fight, and if there's a 10-8, then it significantly improves the chances of that fighter to win, because there's only 2 rounds left and they're already backs against the wall if it was a first round, for example.
Yeah.
But we're talking about competition, yes, but we're talking about a fight. And here's where I have the problem with it. For me, too many of these fights are judged as a competition. And yes, you have to score each round individually. But this is where we see a problem. Like, if we look at Mike Bisping against Anderson Silva, and we take that round there, look at the 2 guys at the end of the fight. Who won the fight? For me, I scored that for Bisping. I thought he won that 3 rounds to 2. Because if we're talking from a competition point, and we're talking about a round per round and going through that way, I thought Bisping won the fight. But looking at the guys, seeing where the real significant damage was, seeing which fighter hurt the other fighter more, I would maybe argue the fact that Anderson Silva won the fight, but Bisping won the competition. Does that make sense? And I think that's the position I think that's the position we end up in. So if you get a fighter that comes out landing heavy leather, beats the shit out of somebody for one of those rounds and wins it 10-8, and then the other fighter scrapes through to 10-2 very close 10-9 rounds, that fighter's winning that fight. From a competition point, I understand that, great. But from a fight point of view, it's a fight. So they haven't won the fight, they've won the competition. And that's, maybe it's going down a rabbit hole, and maybe that's where it is, and you've frozen up, so hopefully you come back in a second and I'm not just talking to myself. But for me, this is where I want to see 10-8s more regularly. I want to see 10-8s given, and he's back, 10-8s given for situations where the round is clear to one person. And like I said in this one here, and I'll read a brief paragraph of it again. Judges must consider giving the score of 10-8 when a fighter impacts their opponent significantly in a round, even though they do not dominate the action. We do not need a round where one fighter pummels the other fighter for it to get a 10-8. What we're looking for is a significant moment in that fight that makes you clearly say that round was for fighter A or B. Now, for me, this is how I scored the fight, and I don't think I'll struggle too much to actually get you to maybe come on side a little bit, or at least understand where I've come from with it. Now that I know where
Here we
your
go,
scores were
ladies
at.
and gents. You hear that?
So-
That's some big words coming. He's going to win us over. Let's go. Let's go.
Yeah, so round one, I completely agree with you. I gave round one to Valentina Shevchenko. The notes I put down: Valentina wins a stand-up, gets the takedown, and has a submission attempt at the end. For me, that's a 10-9 round. It was fairly close, but I thought the jab, I thought in that first round, Valentina looked shit hot, if I'm honest. And, I saw her through fight week, and we had conversations privately, because before I go into this even further, you backed Alexa Grasso, and I was actually backing Valentina Shevchenko to become new. And we disagreed, and we were having a bit of banter about it coming into the fight, and we were watching Shevchenko in the build-up and going, oh, shit, she's going to absolutely smash Grasso to bits. Look at her. Look how focused she is. Or at least that was my mentality looking at it, because she just seemed so dialed in, so, razor focused. And round one, that was clear. I thought, yeah, she looks phenomenal. She was quick. She was darting in and out. She was pushing that jab out. She was catching Alexa, and Alexa seemed to kind of just be downloading a bit of data for me. But, she was getting caught and she lost the round. And that was quite a clear 10-9 for me. I don't think there's any arguments there. Round two. So what? I can't remember if it was at the end of round two or at the beginning. At the end of round one or the beginning of round two. But you're right. Valentina's jab was superb. But the first time Alexa Grasso hit Valentina Shevchenko, there was a big read on it. She hurt her, and she was hurting her every time she tagged her. Not just the big looking ones, even the ones that Shevchenko hid some of those fairly well. But you spoke to Alexa Grasso, and she said she felt my power and she didn't like it. And I was watching Valentina and how she was reacting, and every time Alexa Grasso landed, she hurt Valentina, and it wasn't the same the other way. Yes, they were accurate punches. Yes, they were landing nicely, but I actually thought Alexa Grasso was causing visibly more damage to Valentina Shevchenko. Not talking about faces, cuts, bruises, I'm just purely talking about when she threw a punch and it landed. It was very clear that Alexa Grasso was stronger, the bigger hitter, and I really thought that round one Valentina was on her A game. But I think it was at the end of the round where Alexa hit her for the first time really clean. And I thought, well, she didn't like that. And when she came out in two, she was much more reserved with her attacks. And then I think that's what led Grasso pushing forward. And obviously she knocked Shevchenko from one side of the octagon to the other, in essence. She caught her with that huge shot. Sent her rolling backwards. Now, okay, she was kind of in control of the roll back and used it as a method to stand up because, she's an athlete, she's a fighter, she's in survival mode, and she knows it's a bad place to be down on the ground and she's hurt. But she was hurt, and she was really hurt. Mm-hmm. Then Valentina gets the body lock up against the fence and kind of is just clinging on. She's in survival mode, she's hurt. It was very clear. She knew she couldn't afford to take any clear shots, and she was just hugging on to Alexa with clinging on for dear life. And then Alexa broke that hold and started landing some heavy little shots. They were kind of, these sorts of ones, no big swinging shots or anything else. But there was a moment there where I thought, this might get stopped because she wasn't defending anymore. She was getting a bit of a pummeling. She'd just been knocked down and hurt. She'd been clinging on, and then she was getting tagged repeatedly against the fence. And I just thought, this could get stopped here. And the fact that I thought that, for me, determined that one as a 10-8 round for Alexa Grasso. Now, in fairness to Shevchenko, she did momentarily after that start throwing back and came back into the round, showed she was okay and that she'd kind of recovered a little bit. But there was a brief period there where, Herb Dean kind of sat back and watched, but other referees might have been taking a close look at that. And that was just my opinion. So for me, I actually scored that 10-8 to Alexa Grasso. So at this point, I've got Grasso up in the fight. So then we go into round three. Round three, for me, I've just put guillotine attempt. It's tight, but Alexa escapes. Dominant round for Shevchenko. And for me, again, and I've listened to various of the outlets, podcasts, other people talking about this, and they've all said the same thing about round 3 and round 5. If you're going to score around 10-8 for Valentina Shevchenko, then it's round 3, and I did. I scored this round 10-8 for Valentina Shevchenko because that guillotine was tight. It was in. You referred to Alexander Volkanovski and Brian Ortega earlier on.
Yeah.
Perfect comparison. Just because in that instance Alexander Volkanovski didn't tap and was able to get out of it. The difference was once he did get out, he started pummeling Brian Ortega.
Yeah.
This one, Alexa Grasso, there was no real swing back for me. Valentina Shevchenko was in control for pretty much the entire round. That guillotine was tight. The fact that Alexa Grasso didn't tap doesn't make it a 10-9 for me. It's still a 10-8 just because she didn't tap. That was tight. That was a full submission attempt that Alexa Grasso wasn't able to get out of at that time. It was purely a case of Valentina's arms burn out and she moved positions because Alexa couldn't move in that moment. So for me, that was a 10-8 round in favour of Valentina Shevchenko. So now it's completely swung for me and I've got Shevchenko up. So moving into round 4, the closest round of the fight. My notes on it were Grasso round, cleaner, crisp boxing on the feet, got the takedown, submission attempt to end the round. It was a very tight round. There wasn't a massive amount in it. Valentina was popping out the jab. She was skirting in and out again and starting to look like she'd picked up a bit of momentum again, probably off the back of such a heavy round where she almost finished Alexa Grasso with that guillotine attempt. So I scored that one 10-9 in favour of Alexa Grasso, but I can understand why somebody may have gone the other way. And then we go into the final round, Mike Bell's 10-8 round, and only Mike Bell's 10-8 round, because there's nobody else on the face of this earth that would have scored that at 10-8. I mean, I've listened to Bisping on his podcast talking about how he scored the fight, and he could even say that he could see it 4-1 for Valentina Shevchenko. I can't see that personally, but he was basically saying that he agreed Grasso had won 1 and 3, but had won 2 and potentially 4. But he was saying that he could see an argument where Shevchenko had won 1, 3, 4, and 5. And I can't disagree with that to a certain extent. I do, but I can see the logic behind it. I can see the argument. Round 5 for me, I've just put what a fight. Shevchenko was heading to Anyu until that mistake. Overcommitted and slipped. Grasso capitalised and stole the round. For me, the most impressive thing about Alexa Grasso in this fight is she's so quick, she's so lively, she's so... You make that split-second mistake, she reminds me of almost a Charles Oliveira style. You slip up just that 1 second, she's all over you, and you're in serious trouble, and that's what happened. We saw it in the first fight, how she won that, she got the submission. This fight was the same. So for me, I actually scored this fight 47-46 in favour of Alexa Grasso. Again, we don't need to point out what the scores were necessarily, but obviously we have 48-47 Grasso, 48-47 Shevchenko, and then we have a 47-47 draw because Mike Bell scores that round 10-8. Now, Mike Bell's out of his goddamn mind. There is no way that you could score that 10-8. Yes, Valentina was popping out that jab. She was winning that round. I've put it there. She was on her way to Anyu, and then she slipped up, and Alexa Grasso was all over her to finish that fight out. And for me, that final sequence from Grasso stole that round. But even if you gave it to Shevchenko, you cannot give it a 10-8. It's not even close to a 10-8. Of the two of them, if you were going to give a 10-8, I could see more of an argument for Alexa Grasso in the final round of a 10-8, but I can't see it for anybody. It's just bollocks, absolute bollocks. And I think if we get a decision at the end of that fight where we have a split decision and we've got 2 judges in favour of Alexa Grasso and 1 in favour of Valentina Shevchenko, everybody says that was a close fight. Grasso's a champ. Yeah. The fact that this has now come out saying this is a split draw, that's why we're going to get the rematch. It was a cracking fight anyway, but
it's probably what's going to happen, right?
The controversy behind that draw And the fact that it is a draw, I can see a draw, but not for the 10-8 rounds that he scored. I'm looking at 2 and 3 and saying, there's a swing round there in 4 potentially. But it's just, utter shit. I mean, Mike Bell should be dragged in front of the board. He should be dragged in front of the public and the media to explain his decision there, because for me, if you've scored 10-8s in that fight, I'm on side with you. But not in round 5. No way.
No. I don't think anyone's seeing that. And I saw Ariel Hawani actually tweeted just not long before we came on that they are doing, I think on Wednesday or Thursday, a kind of emergency in the Nevada State Athletic Commission. They're doing an emergency meeting about this, and there obviously is, recognition of it. There does need to be responsibility. I think, you said it perfectly about that 5th round. I mean, I actually counted up in that point where Grasso has her back and she's raining down. She rains down 10 unanswered punches, and Valentina's just doing this.
Yeah.
But it's no way. It's not a 10-8. There's not enough real fight-ending moments there. Whichever way you define it, in terms of the way that we both see it a bit differently in terms of the 10-8, it doesn't fit either of what we were talking about because of how the previous 3 minutes or so had gone of that round. I mean, it's a major mess up from
Mike
Bell.
The problem for me is you look at round 2 and you look at round 3, my 10-8s. Both of those rounds were more dominant for the fighter that I scored it to. Grasso with a knockdown and Shevchenko with a guillotine attempt than round 5, sorry. Rounds 2 and 3 were more dominant for the fighter that won the round, whether you scored it 10-9 or 10-8. They were more dominant than round 5. Yeah. So this is the issue, though, because
I agree with that.
If you look at your scorecard, for example, you're looking at Alexa Grasso knocking Valentina Shevchenko from one side to the other side and raining in punches. But you're scoring that 10-9 the same as you score in round 4 for either fighter. It's crazy. It wasn't the same round. It shouldn't be scored the same. That's my problem with it. And, when you look at that, it says something impactful that deteriorates or takes away from a fighter's confidence, X, Y, and Z. I'm not going to read it word for word again, but are you telling me that Grasso knocking Shevchenko from one side of the ring to the other and then absolutely laying into her is not taking away from her capabilities and what of course it is. So it's a 10-8 round. People might not like it because, like you adjudicated, sort of leaned towards earlier on, we're talking about something that's happened in a fight there where people want to see a 10-8 as being an absolute mauling. Doesn't have to be. That's not what it is. The rules don't suggest that. It says that it should be considered. So I've got no issue with 10-9s there on either of those rounds. If you scored 2 and 3, 10-9, for Shevchenko and Grasso, fine. I have no problem with it because all it says is a judge must consider a 10-8. If you've decided not, fine. But I'm not also wrong for deciding that is, because I've considered what I thought was the standout moment, and in those 2 rounds, Grasso with the heavy knockdown and then the follow-up punches, and Shevchenko with a tight guillotine attempt, they swayed them 10-8 for me. But I think, we could talk about the fight and we could talk about everything that surrounds it, but we talk about what's next. Alexa didn't see... I was a little disappointed, actually, because she was obviously happy to retain. But to retain in a draw, I thought she won the fight, so I get it. Yeah. But to retain in a draw and then kind of sort of brush off a 3rd fight, I mean, it'd be interesting. But what's your thoughts? What do you think should be next?
I do and I don't want to see the trilogy. Is it a Brandon Moreno, Davison Figueiredo situation we're talking about here? Honestly, no, because no matter which way we slice a lemon, right? We've both come out to the same conclusion. Alexa Grasso won the fight. I'm happy with that. She did her in the first fight by finish, and this went to a draw technically, but hey, we both come across that. I want to see a bit of new life breathe into the division. I want to see one of those contenders rise up. Look, it can fit, right? The timeline fits. You could have Grasso and Shevchenko running it back December, January, probably more likely January. Stick on the undercard, Blanchfield, Firo, boom, Bob's your uncle, bang, you've got the next 2 title fights done. It fits, it works, great, no problem. Is that what I'd like to see? I don't know. Would I watch it? Of course, I'm going to watch it. But yeah, because then it becomes, okay, well, if Valentina goes and wins that fight, then what do you do? Right. And if that's another close decision, then what do you do?
Yeah.
We're just in this roundabout. I think you give Valentina a break. You know, Amanda Nunes. Oh, no, Amanda Nunes didn't take a break. I'm trying to think of a champ who kind of took a break and then came back a little bit. Anyway, it'll come. Take a little bit of a break, similar to what Izzy needs, I think. Take a break, come back a bit more refreshed, let the title picture play it out, because either of those girls could beat each other, and then kind of let it go from there. Right. In the interest of time, I am going to read out some words from our community, the Combat Sports UK community, and then we are going to wrap up with the Fiziev Gamrot fight. So we'll start with Alex, our former co-host from last week. Here's what he had to say. A fun and high-level main event. There was more urgency from Shevchenko this time around, and she seemed more aggressive. Grasso's punches caused problems for Shevchenko again, and Shevchenko went back to the wrestling, as I thought she would, and had success there, leading to the submission attempts. Although I thought Grasso's defense improved from last time. You could have scored that fight for either woman, but a 10-8 for Grasso there doesn't make sense to me. Billy Darlington had to say, I think Saturday night further clarified that judges should be part of the press conference afterwards if the commissions insist on sticking with the same incompetent people every time. Sounds like an echo of what you were saying earlier with your mate Sol. The direction the women's flyweight division goes is completely up in the air for me now, and I think a Valentina trilogy stinks a little bit, as much as she arguably does deserve it. Reece Anderson, great event, great fans, really good matchmaking, scoring, and making sense for the main event. Could talk about the fact that judges should explain the decisions, but also the fact that Aaron Brotstetter has tweeted that he would be fined heavily for talking to media without the commission's agreement. That's a very interesting point. And finally, before we go to that preview, Billy Gadd, he talked also about Raul Rosas Jr.'s ceiling. I don't think he's going to have enough time to develop against the competition and build better fundamentals. So I can fully see him just being someone that explodes hard in round one and then loses. So coming up this weekend.
Well, I know you're wanting to shoot off, Taylor, because I know it's much later there for you than it is for me. But just quickly for me, for what's next, I mean, I echo your sentiment. I thought Alexa Grasso won the fight. So for me, as far as I'm concerned, she won the first by submission. She won the second one on points. Do I think we'll see it again? Yes, I think we'll see it next. Agreed. I think if we had a standout number one contender, then it would be a little different. The fact that no one really knows who's next out of Blanchfield and Ferrell, you nailed it. I mean, it's been said by outlets all over the world anyway. You know, everyone seems to be leaning the same way. Run it back, put Manon Fiorot and Erin Blanchfield back on, make that the number one contender fight. And then you know where you're going after that. But it does raise the issue, like you said, and like if Valentina wins, then it's a little unfair on Grasso not to give her a rematch. But for me, I'll be honest with you, I'm okay with them running it back. And the reason I think that, I don't think we'll ever see Valentina Shevchenko hold gold again. Because for me, she's getting older. I don't think it was necessarily visible. I don't think it's that she's slowed down, because that would take away from Alexa Grasso. I just think that Alexa Grasso is getting better and better and better. And I think Valentina Shevchenko came in better than she did last time, and still, in my opinion, got beat. I think I think she struggles with the power, the explosiveness, and the speed of Alexa Grasso. I think strength in the clinch, strength on the ground, power in the fists. I think Grasso's just got Valentina Shevchenko's number, and I think if they were to meet again, I actually think we could see a Grasso finish. So I'd almost like that for Grasso. I'd like to see that happen, but like I said, that kind of wraps up UFC Noche and a hell of a card. So we'll swiftly move on to one hell of a card to another hell of a card coming up.
Right, let's go. Let's dive straight into the main event. Rafael Fiziev coming back after his loss to Justin Gaethje at UFC London earlier this year. And Mateusz Gamrot coming back from his loss to Beneil Dariush also earlier this year. How do you see this one playing out? This is a really interesting fight, I think, in this division.
It's a very interesting fight, full stop, but it's an even more interesting fight because of the last time outs. if you like, especially for Fiziev, because Fiziev's there knocking dangerous fighter, exciting as hell, throws the nasty kicks, he's got the hands to go with it. I actually thought he was winning the fight against Justin Gaethje to start with, until Gaethje kind of moved his game plan up a little bit and showed us all why he's improved, and continued that into the BMF fight with Dustin Poirier. But I think on another night and against another opponent, Rafael Fiziev wins that fight. I think it was just purely the fact of everything that Gaethje has, all of his strong points, winning that fight. I think when we talk about Mateusz Gamrot, I'm just waiting for Gamrot. I'm waiting for him to explode, because he has got all the skills and all the talent in the world that he needs to become a world champion. He's already beaten Sarukian, who again stands with that exact same thing. He's got all the skills in the world to get there. We're talking about that went life and death, if you like, with Islam Makhachev. So we've got that bar. We know where they stand. I mean, when we look at Gamrot, just looking at his record there, we've got Jalen Turner last time out. They lost to Beneil Dariush before that. No shame in that. Okay, we saw Beneil, lose comprehensively to Charles Oliveira, but we're talking about Charles Oliveira for starters. And secondly, I think he kind of got caught in the headlights a little bit there.
I completely forgot about that Jalen Turner fight, actually.
Yeah.
Completely forgot about it.
But then before that, you've got Sarukian, Ferreira, Jeremy Stevens, and his last loss prior to that, because he was on 17-0, was against Gurem Kutaladze, which was a split decision loss, and it's one of them. It can happen earlier on in your career. And I just think, for me, Gamrot just he can't seem to put together a consistent run against top guys. And he's very much like Sarukian in that respect. They've got all the talent in the world, and there's absolutely no reason why they wouldn't be in with a shot as being some of the top guys in this division. They're both capable of winning the world title. How far can Gamrot go? He can go all the way. He really can. He's got everything he needs to do it, but he just needs to hit a run of form, because what we see with Gamrot is beats a good name, falls. Beats a good name, beats a good name, beats a good name, beats a good name, falls.
Yeah.
Beats a good name. This needs to be the run. This needs to be the one where he beats Fiziev, and I actually think he will. If I'm going to take a pick, I think it's a real close fight. I wouldn't be surprised either way. I think this is on the Apex, right?
Yep. Back
That's
to the Apex.
disgusting.
Weirdly enough.
Fuck the Apex.
Feels
off.
like so long. Yeah.
Fiziev and Gamrot should not be fighting in the Apex. That should be in front of a crowd. I understand it's a main event. I understand there's maybe something in it for the two of them, but come on. This is a fight everyone wants to see. To put it on in the Apex is just to shut that fucking place down, burn it down. Could do with them hackers that hacked into the Las Vegas casinos. Hack the Apex. Hack the Apex and get rid of it. But yeah, that's my views on that fight in particular.
So your pick, confirm your pick there.
Gamrot.
Points. Decision, finish. So points, huh? Okay. Yeah, I agree. I think what stands out in this fight is Gamrot's well-roundedness. I would expect to see him go to the clinch to get to the wrestling. You don't want to hang in the clinch, obviously, with Fiziev because of his Muay Thai background, but I would expect to see Gamrot put into the fence, try and go around it that way. Will he outdo him in the striking? It's very possibly. I think Fiziev's got to have learned his lesson against Gaethje, where he didn't really pull the trigger when he could have in that first round, and then struggled to adapt once Gaethje came after him and changed his game plan. So I think we'll see. We'll see if Fiziev is really, really going to be this guy that everybody thought he was before he met Justin Gaethje. We're going to find out in this fight. This fight, I think, for Rafael Fiziev is a huge fight. Maybe bigger than it is for Gamrot, because I feel like the hype around Fiziev was bigger than it ever was around Gamrot. Gamrot has kind of gone under the radar. Like you said, we've been waiting for him.
Well, we've got Fiziev ranked at number 6 and we've got Gamrot ranked at 7. But it doesn't feel like that. It feels like Gamrot's maybe 8, 9, 10. Like he feels like he's much further down the pecking order. And maybe because Fiziev's had that fight with Gaethje and you kind of put him up there as being like he was on the fringe of those top names. But
Yeah.
Fiziev feels like he's much higher in the rankings than Gamrot at this stage. So you're right. For Gamrot, it's a win-win. For Fiziev, it seems crazy because you lose to Gamrot. Anybody who knows the sport and knows what Gamrot's capable of, it's almost expected. Like, it wouldn't shock me at all. It wouldn't be a surprise, and I wouldn't think negatively about Fiziev. But from the kind of a casual point of view, you lose to Fiziev, you're kind of slipping down a little. You lose if Fiziev loses to Gamrot, you're kind of slipping down those rankings a little bit, and you're being seen as you're fringe, but you've not got the minerals to get to that next stage, which I don't think is correct. But I do think on this occasion, Gamrot's the same as you, the better all-round fighter, and I would expect him to mix it up and beat Fiziev.
Yeah, so we'll bring it home from there. We've got articles coming out on the main event and the co-main event, which is Dan Ige and Bryce Mitchell, which will bring a lot of attention. Expect those tomorrow. So for the co-main event, will be Dan Ige and Bryce Mitchell coming out tomorrow. And then the main event, tomorrow, being Wednesday. So the day the podcast comes out, so actually today, go to the Combat Sports UK website to check out those two in-depth articles where we'll look at those fighters in a bit more detail, get you hyped for the fights. And then Thursday, for the main event that we have just discussed. So, Nathan, any final words before we close this one out?
No, I mean, just on the card, there's a few cracking fights on there. I think there's some really interesting knocks. Not necessarily some of the biggest names, but they're interesting 50-50 fights, a lot of them. So it's going to be one of those apex cards that's, we're probably going to be blessed with 2 back-to-back fight nights here that are going to be excellent. So definitely one to tune in and watch. Final words. I mean, look, the only thing I would touch on is this podcast thing that we've just got started up doing. We're finding our feet a little bit with it. We're brand new to it. We've jumped in feet first. We've had all 3 of us on last week on the MMA pod. We mixed it up again, switching personnel for the boxing podcast, and we're back on with the MMA one now, where we're going to have just 2 people having a chat just like ourselves. So, if it seemed a little bit structured, a little bit, however, on the first episode, hopefully we've shown, we're here for a bit of a laugh as well. We're going to mix a few things in. We're just fans of the sport. We absolutely love it. We're not going to hold back, and it's going to be unfiltered opinions from this point on, unless, Lewis and Sean say otherwise, in which case you probably not see me again. But we'll get to that when we come to it. But yeah, that's all from me, mate.
Awesome. Brilliant. So thank you, obviously, Nathan, for your time and for being here. We've done almost 2 hours here. So if you are still around listening, thank you very much. I hope it was well worth it. Shout out to the guys as well. Reese, Billy, Alex, other Billy, for jumping on with their comments. We'd love to hear from you. Tweet Combat Sports UK, Facebook, get involved as well. And obviously on the YouTube, in the comments if you think that Nathan is an absolute nutter for giving 2 10-8 rounds. But I will say he's going to make me look at it differently, and I want to see some changes. So like, subscribe, get involved with the Combat Sports UK community. We've got lots of good stuff coming up as always. We are busy. We've got stuff out all the time, lots of stuff to read on the website. Thank you all very much. And until next week, enjoy the fights.